Okay, another subject for you dealers. Think about value. I want you to just think about what that word means, how you would define the word value. And now if we think about this in the context of used cars, then we want to really think about what is the value of used car and what keeps us sometimes from selling a car at its market value. So maybe to help kind of frame this, I can back up and tell a few stories. I've always kind of related a story about many years ago. I was, a young man, 20s or 30s, and I remember having a conversation with somebody. At that time, I was in the retail business, and they talked about buying something that they were pleased about. They got it at a discount, and this was like a used item. It was actually like an antique item. And I remember that they came back and said that they were thrilled with this purchase because they bought something for $30 that was actually worth $75. And I just remember reacting at the time that word worth, okay? So we kind of can exchange that with the word value. When you say something is worth $75, then I would just say, let's think about it this way. Something is only worth whatever a buyer and a seller are willing to exchange for it. And on that particular day, this item was apparently only worth $30 because that's the number that the buyer and seller agreed to. And so we understand this, yet we don't think about it enough. And so in that particular example, it was clear that this person realized what I was saying. And the other thing that I remember having that conversation is, does it really matter if you say it's worth 75? Does it really matter if it's worth 75 if you don't intend to sell it? So we can think about that in the context of our business and what our portfolio might be worth. But if you don't intend to sell your business and you don't intend to sell your contracts, then what does it matter what it's worth? I mean, to the extent that it impacts what we pay in terms of income tax, but it's really what does it yield for us? And what would a buyer and seller be willing to pay in exchange, for those items? So now let's take it down to the idea of this used car. When we think about the value, sometimes we let our own ideas about something's value get in the way. So, obviously those of us in the car business, we've been around this long enough that we've seen that, you go to the auction on any given day and there's a car that runs through the lane and maybe you've already booked it out in advance and which book did you pick? Did you pick Black Book? Book NADA, what book did you pick? Probably the numbers were different. But obviously those books are guides and they're meant to be something historical. But isn't it true that if you find a car that you're going to buy and there's some green car rolling through and you book it out and it says the car's worth $5,300 according to the book. But if it rolls through, isn't it really just worth whatever two parties are willing to pay for it? So, if that number today is the highest bidder in the lane is $4,800, and there are multiple bidders, and the car was on display plenty long for people to see it, and there were plenty of bidders standing in the lane with interest in the car, but the high bidder was willing to spend $4,800. My question is, isn't that really what the car's worth? Because multiple bidders, car was clean, presentable, and you had multiple bidders perhaps participate in it to the end, then that's really, in my mind, what the car is worth right now, regardless of what the books say. And that's easy for us to understand what the book might suggest a car is worth. Sometimes we also factor in what we spent for the car and maybe what we spent reconditioning the car. And now if it's our used car, it's a trade-in, it's an age unit, and we're selling it at the auction, we have in our mind what it's worth. So now let's take the example of a used car manager, and maybe that's you, maybe you're the dealer representing, a used car manager, but we've all been at the auction where a used car manager's got a car for sale, they roll them through, and the used car manager's got a number in mind. They've got their minimum, their reserve, whatever they feel like they have to have out of it. Now the car rolls through, that same example, the green car. If you're the seller and you had in mind that car was worth $5,300, maybe you have $5,700 in the car and you're hoping to get $53 out of it. But again, the car was clean. It was available for sale for, throughout the whole week. And so people were able to preview the car. And now it comes through and you've got multiple bidders and the car only goes to $4,800. Now ask yourself, if you're the used car manager and you pass on that $4,800, because in your mind the car's worth more, you own it for more, and you want to hang on to it and try it again next week to see if it brings more, what's really happening there? Basically what you're doing is you're saying the market today didn't didn't bear, that the car would bring what I wanted for it. But aren't we in a way bringing a little bit of ego to that to say, I'm right about the value of this car. Everybody else in the auction lane is wrong because all these experienced buyers were unwilling to pay the price that I want. So I would ask us to think about that and think about if the car's clean and it runs through and there are multiple bidders and multiple bidders bid it and maybe there's only final two that go that last $200 or $300. Isn't that really all the car's worth? Why would we hang on to it? Why wouldn't we let it go? And I would ask you to think about that. Because if I could take that $4,800, even though I own the car for $58, in my example, $57, then if I could take that $4,800 and go buy another car and bring it back to the lot, then I've just exchanged something that wasn't working for me. I took that same cash and I invested in something that's going to have value for me. It's going to turn for me. And so I think the key thing I'm trying to drive home here is that, that value is only what a buyer and seller are willing to pay. And if we've got something and we've got multiple bidders and it brings a number, then I would suggest to you that's the value. And by the way, as a buyer myself, who's always said, I've been around this business now for 20 plus years. Got in the buy here, pay here business in '97. I was doing my own buying back then. And so all the years of buying, all the auctions on my own behalf and behalf of other dealers that where I manage the dealership, whatever, of all the years of buying, I never have considered myself a car person. I'm really a finance person, right? Who makes a living in the car business because that happens to be what we finance. My point is when I step in the auction lane, I don't know cars. If I were standing next to you, you probably know cars and know a particular car that comes through better than I would. But when I'm bidding on the car, I'm really bidding on what's that car worth to me? What's that particular piece of metal worth to me? And I'm going to arrive at that number based on my finance program, and I'm going to step in there and start bidding it. But I also would lean quite heavily on the idea that regardless of what the book said, and regardless of what I said how it might fit in my program, if I saw a car come through and I felt like based on what we'd been paying for that kind of car, if I felt like I should be able to get that car, for example, in the low fours, and now the car rolls through and it gets 45 and I'm still bidding and now I'm at 46, and I'm thinking, I really don't want to spend that much for this car, but I'm not the only bidder. There are two other bidders on the other side of the car who are not the sellers, not the owners. We have to watch for that. They're not the owners of the vehicle. The car's, and so I have actual bidders. I know these bidders perhaps, and I'm at 46, I'm at 48, and there are still people bidding. So the question is, even though I wanted to buy the car for 43, isn't today the car apparently worth 48? Because I've got multiple bidders. There are other people willing to pay that. And so in order for me to get it, if I have to go to 49 and own the car, that's apparently its real value today, because there were actual bidders that were willing to pay that price. They were willing to pay 48 and I went to 49 and got it. And now I might think I overpaid for the car, but did I? I paid exactly what the market said that car was worth today. And I think that applies for those of us that are out there having to buy, especially right now, in this current market in 2021, coming off of COVID, we've seen really high used car prices. And people are frustrated about that. But in reality, if a car that we used to buy for $4, we're now having to pay $6 for that car, we feel like we're paying $6,000 for a $4,000 car, but we're really not. We're paying $6,000 for a $6,000 car, and if we're not prepared to do that, we're not going to have any inventory, and we're not really going to have a business. So it's like we just have to accept that the value of the car is whatever the value is today. And listen, I understand there's a lot more to consider on that subject, but just let's think about what the word value means and what it is that we have to pay. And so I would just ask new buyers that are in there to maybe adopt that same approach that I used, which is to say, if multiple bidders are there, then I'm not overpaying. We have to make sure, of course, in the auction we can get taken advantage of, that we have to make sure those are real bidders that really have an interest in owning the car. And if we are, then we can step in there and know that we're competing, and we know that we're willing to pay a price that's comparable with what other people are willing to pay. And that helps you bid with more confidence when you can do that and know that you're really buying at a market value. And so obviously with experience, all of us will get better about that, but I think having some understanding going in of what the real value is of that car, then that helps us to make a judgment on what we're willing to spend. And then the same thing would also be true on any other assets in our business. But we just need to make sure, as I said in other sessions, we have to make sure we optimize those assets, whatever we're spending for them, whatever the market says we have to spend for them, or whatever the market says they would sell for, then we need to leverage those assets, move them quickly, optimize whatever assets we own, turn them through as quickly as possible, and don't sit on them too long. And then one quick subject related to that is if we overspend for a car, we made a mistake, we missed something mechanically on a car, and we bought it for $5,000 and now it needed $700 that we didn't anticipate, and so now we own it for $5,700 and we really own it for too much. So we made a mistake. Okay, it happens, right? We're not going to get them all right. We made a mistake. But I would ask you, don't make a second mistake by now penalizing your customer by pricing a car higher relative to cost. Now you set your down payment higher because you own it for more. And I would say that then we're making a second mistake, because now instead of setting our numbers based on the real value, what we should own that car for, we try to pass along those expenses to the consumer, and now the car sits because we're asking for a large down payment or a high price, and the car sits. So now we're making a second mistake. I would just always ask you to try to price that stuff based on what it's really worth, so to speak. Set that value, understand what the car is really worth. What would it bring if I ran it at the auction tomorrow, regardless of what I put in it? And now we can set a price according to its value, and we can avoid making a second mistake by setting our price too high.